What's up, guys? In this video, I'm gonna show you how you can take your Lache game to the next level. So there are a ton of different Lache techniques that we're gonna cover on this channel, but by request, today we're gonna be covering the linked Lache, or as we call it at Ninja Obstacle Academy, the carry Lache. Now, we've already done some Lache coverage on this channel, so I'm not gonna backtrack. If you need that, go check that out. This video is assuming that you already have locked and dialed in a 6-foot Lache minimum. So if you can't hit a 6-foot Lache yet, I don't recommend trying the techniques that we're gonna go over in this video. Go back, work on your fundamentals, get your 6-foot Lache down pat, and then you can dive into this. As a ninja trainer, I would be doing you a disservice if I did not talk about what I'm about to jump into. Simply put, swinging from things is tough on your shoulders. There's a lot of nuance to this that I can't get into in this video. I'll be making more videos about how you can increase and improve your shoulder health, how you can make sure that your shoulders are healthy enough to be able to do this stuff, what kinds of exercises you should be doing at home to prevent them from being injured, or at least reduce the risk of that happening. But one of the things that you can do to make sure that you reduce the risk of your shoulders being injured is be careful with how you approach these movements. You have to make sure that you avoid being vertically stacked when you take on new weight or when you take on force. What I mean by that, again, if you're up and down, if your shoulders are in line with your hips vertically while you're swinging through an obstacle, if you're doing carry Laches like this, that's gonna hurt long term. That's not, if that's how you're approaching your carry Laches or really any kind of movement, that's going to end up hurting your shoulders long term. Reason being, your shoulders are open in that position. They're spread out, they're wide, not closed. Closed shoulders are safe shoulders, always. Well, not entirely, always. Closed shoulders are safe shoulders, most of the time. So the big takeaways from this section are two things. Number one, make sure that when you are practicing these carry Laches, that your shoulders and your hips are not vertically stacked, that you have your hips behind or in front of your shoulders anytime you're taking on new amounts of force or pressure. And number two, keep your shoulders closed as much as possible. Bring your shoulders together. Try to think about if you were bending the bar that you're hanging or swinging from. That's gonna help you keep your shoulders closed. That's gonna keep them locked inside that shoulder girdle, nice and healthy. So first things first, for most of this video, I'm gonna be referring to it as a carry Lache. That's just the terminology that we use here. It's the same thing as a linked Lache. It's the same thing as linking obstacles. And the goal of being able to do this is to reduce the amount of time that you're actually on the obstacle itself, capitalize on the momentum that you already have so that you're not having to recreate momentum, rebuild your swing every time you grab it, and also allow for you to carry that momentum off the obstacle into the next one so that you're wasting as little time as possible. The other cool thing about this is that it allows you to move ridiculously efficiently through the course, which is going to benefit you in way more ways than you'd think. Because if you ask just about any ninja, what's the number one thing you struggle with the most? It's probably 95% certain that the answer you're gonna get is endurance. They're gonna say, oh, I need to work on my endurance. I need to work on my cardio. I need to make it so that I can stay at my top level a little bit longer while I run through the course. Taking this approach, this kind of analytical approach to technique, you're gonna end up being able to reduce the amount of energy expended as you go through the course, and that's going to mean you have more energy for later on in the course when the obstacles get a little bit more endurance oriented, there's more grip focused, stuff like that. So if you take this principle that I'm gonna go over in this video and apply it to a multitude of other different obstacles, it really comes down to being more than a carry Lache. It comes down to linking the obstacles so you can carry momentum further and further and further and further into the course. This concept of carrying momentum forward with you capitalizes on the idea of like inertia. And instead of having to start, stop, which is gonna take a ton of energy, you're going to be able to keep moving. Think about like a car. You get higher MPG on a highway because you're not stopping and starting so much. You're not really having to accelerate again and again and again and again. This is the same concept as that. You're basically getting the better mileage from your movements by continuing forward through them instead of having to waste all your energy by starting and stopping over and over again, restarting your swing every time you grab the bar, taking a break in between every obstacle, and then jumping into the next one. If you capitalize on this linking concept, applying what we work on in carry Laches today, you'll be able to carry momentum through the course, just like a car on a highway, which means you're gonna have better fuel efficiency, if that makes any sense. Okay. The thing about a carry lache is that it's completely different than a regular lache. So on a regular lache, if you've seen my previous videos on this, it's about drawing a straight line from where your hips are to the bar that you're trying to reach and releasing the bar at that point. However, on a carry lache, you actually don't want to aim for going toward the bar that you're trying to grab. At least not if it's a close distance, like 6 or so feet, especially if you're a taller guy like me. Now on big distances, sure, you're gonna wanna go toward the bar at least a little bit, but the key thing here is that you wanna make sure there's enough distance between you and the bar you're aiming for that you can fully stretch out and lean forward to grab that bar, which is gonna pivot your body so your hips are back, and that's what's gonna cause you to fall forward. Now there are a couple of variations to the carry lache that I'll go into. I'll start with the most fundamental one. The reason I teach this one first is because it allows you to train symmetrically to get your timing down and your rhythm, and you're less likely to get hurt because you're making sure you're catching the bar with both hands simultaneously rather than one. So your basic intro level carry lache, what are you doing? You're releasing the bar at the very end of your front swing, so you basically end up going straight up in the air. That's kind of the idea. Now, obviously that's gonna change based on distance. If it's a really big gap, then you're gonna wanna go a little bit further forward. You don't wanna go straight up in the air because you just won't be able to reach the next bar. But for a gap this size, even a lot of my kid students who are like 4 feet, 4'6", stuff like that, they can cover this distance with absolutely no problem. So it is good to be able to make sure that you go up into the air rather than straight out forward. You've gotten to the end of your front swing. You've gone straight up into the air and released the bar. The next thing you're gonna do is try to flip your body over so you're leaning forward. You're gonna do this by throwing your feet back. You're gonna kind of open up. We talked about the differences between closed and open, closed and open. You're gonna open up. That's gonna throw your feet back. That's gonna throw your shoulders forward. And that's what's gonna allow you to be horizontally aligned with your hips behind your shoulders, which is the key indicator of whether you're gonna be able to have enough momentum to get that carry lache. So if you think about the movie like Inception's a good example, or like Doctor Strange, where they like move the world around them and then they end up falling different directions even though they never touched anything. That's kind of the idea, except in this case, you are the world. So you're flipping the world. So you're up in the air, you have no momentum, you flip your body so your feet are behind you, your hips are behind your shoulders, and your arms are outstretched, reaching forward for the next bar. This is probably the quintessential step that's going to lead to you being able to do a carry lache, is getting comfortable in that position, because it's super scary, because if you miss, you're gonna hit the ground on your face. The biggest hang up that I see most people have when it comes to carry laches is they're so used to doing the regular lache that they end up aiming for the bar, and then they end up not understanding why they didn't have any momentum. Well, you didn't have any momentum because you were vertically stacked when you caught that bar. You want to be the opposite of that. Like, if you're doing that lache technique that I worked on in the previous video, where you're trying to catch and be horizontally stacked with your hips in front, you want to be the opposite if you're trying to get a carry lache. You want to be horizontally stacked. That means your shoulders and your hips are more or less in line, parallel to the ground. You want to be that way with your hips behind your shoulders when you catch the next bar or object you're trying to lache to and from, if you're going to be able to do this. Long story short, most people get too close to the bar that they're trying to carry lache from. Hang up number 2 is the psychological freak out that happens when you have to be ready to fall down like that if you miss the bar. But if you manage to overcome both of these, then you're gonna have a ton of power when you grab that next bar, because what happens is you've gone up in the air, you've rotated your body so your hips are behind your shoulders, your arms are outstretched, nice closed shoulders. That means I'm rotated inward, my arms are outstretched. I'm gonna grab the next bar with my hips already elevated. So essentially what I've done is I've taken the end of that front swing and turned it into the end of this backswing. So I've already got my hips way up in the air, my hips are gonna fall down, and then I'm gonna be able to transition to that bar. Okay, so fundamentally the first one that I recommend everybody learn is this two-handed approach, just like that. However, there is another variation on this where it's a little more stylized, where you're kind of throwing one hip up in the air first, and then you're releasing that hand and then the other hand, and so you kind of get this whipping sensation in your carry lache, that's totally fine. It's a totally reasonable thing. I do it in my laches when I'm competing and stuff like that. I'm not slamming that. It's good, it's fine. The reason I don't teach that technique first is because it's just a little bit easier to get hurt when you do that one. Something goes wrong, you don't let go when you thought you did with your backhand, and then you end up catching on one arm, and if you haven't trained your shoulders to be able to handle that yet, it's gonna be pretty tough and it can hurt. So generally, I'm gonna start with this variation. That said, again, nothing wrong with the single hip toss approach to linking laches or the carry lache. In fact, you're gonna get a ton of power from it, which is another reason why I teach this version first, because if you can do 6 foot with this one, or you could do 8 foot with this one, when I teach you how to do that hip toss, you're gonna end up having way more power. You'll be hitting 10, 12, etc. with much less effort. So that's it on carry laches, guys. The key points to remember when you're doing this training is number 1, don't go at the bar, try to go above it. Try to go up and then rotate yourself toward it. Number 2, to generate that forward tilt, you're gonna wanna throw your feet behind you and keep them there. Number 3, when you go to reach for the next bar, you want to be horizontally stacked, or at least as close to that as possible. You wanna avoid being vertically stacked because you're not gonna have any momentum when you catch the bar, and it's gonna be pretty tough on your shoulders in a bad way. So get as close to horizontally stacked as you can so that your hips are going to fall down and generate that swing into the next lache. Once you have this technique locked in, when you've got the 2-hand release, if you wanna try that hip toss, go for it. Just remember that it's a little bit more risky, so be sure to practice handstand training, do other kind of isometric training to get your shoulders nice and sturdy on the inside. We'll do an entire training video on connective tissue development later on, but for the time being, do your planks, handstands, make sure your shoulders are healthy before you try that hip toss linked lache. Bottom line, make sure you're doing your isometric training and your handstand training and just generally getting your shoulders nice and healthy before you try these moves, particularly going in for that hip toss carry lache. So that's all. If you found this helpful, please do comment below, give it a like, subscribe to the channel, helps us out a ton, and I look forward to seeing you guys in the next video.